Chapter 1: The Birth of Power. Why human beings seek control throughout human history. One force has shaped kingdoms, nations, revolutions, and civilizations more than almost anything else. That force is power. Power has built cities. Power has created empires. Power has protected nations. But power has also destroyed leaders, divided societies, and brought down people who once appeared untouchable. The story of power is not only the story of presidents, kings, generals, and rulers. It is the story of human nature, because before power becomes political, it begins as something deeply human: the desire to influence, the desire to matter, the desire to control our environment and protect what we value. Every society, from ancient kingdoms to modern democracies, has struggled with the same question. Why do some people seek power, and why do they fight so hard to keep it once they have obtained it? More than 500 years ago, an Italian philosopher named Niccolò Machiavelli attempted to answer this question. In his famous work, The Prince, written in the early 16th century, Machiavelli examined the realities of political leadership. He was not writing about an imaginary world where leaders always acted with perfect morality. He was studying the real world, a world where rulers competed, a world where alliances changed, a world where people had ambitions, fears, and personal interests. Machiavelli understood something important. Power is not only gained through good intentions. Power must be protected. A ruler who wants to survive must understand human behavior. They must understand loyalty. They must understand ambition. They must understand that people often support leaders because of what they hope to gain, not only because of what they believe. This idea remains one of the most important lessons in the study of power, because every powerful person exists inside a network of relationships. No leader stands alone. Behind every powerful figure are supporters, advisors, institutions, and individuals whose own interests become connected to that person's success. At the beginning, power often appears simple. A leader rises, people follow. A vision is presented, a movement begins. Many leaders throughout history started with genuine missions. Some wanted to liberate their countries. Some wanted to restore order. Some wanted to remove corruption. Some wanted to create a better future. But history shows us that power changes the environment around the person who holds it. The person who begins as a leader of a movement may eventually become the center of a system. And once a person becomes the center of a system, leaving power becomes much more complicated. This is where another writer helps us understand the psychology behind power. Robert Greene, in his book The 48 Laws of Power, studied the patterns of influence in human behavior throughout history. Greene argues that power is not only about authority. It is about understanding people. It is about understanding motivations. It is about understanding fear, ambition, reputation, and relationships. One of the important lessons from Greene's work is that powerful positions attract people with different intentions. Some people genuinely believe in the mission. Others are attracted by opportunities. Some seek protection. Others seek influence. And some quietly wait for their own moment to rise. This creates one of the greatest challenges of leadership. The same people who help someone gain power may later become the people who challenge that power. History repeatedly shows this pattern. Julius Caesar provides one of the clearest examples. Rome was experiencing political instability. The traditional political system was struggling. Caesar gained popularity because many Romans saw him as a strong leader who could restore order. His military victories increased his influence. His supporters believed he could save Rome. But his growing power frightened the political elite. The same success that made Caesar powerful also made his opponents believe that he had become too powerful. In 44 BC, Caesar was assassinated by members of the Roman Senate. The tragedy of Caesar teaches us a fundamental lesson. Power creates admiration and fear at the same time. The person who becomes powerful may gain millions of supporters, but they may also create powerful enemies. This is the paradox of power. The higher a person rises, the more attention they attract. The more influence they gain, the more people have reasons to either protect them or challenge them. Another historical example is Napoleon Bonaparte. Napoleon rose from a military officer to become Emperor of France. His leadership transformed Europe. His victories created a legend around him. Many people saw him as a genius, but his ambition continued expanding. The same military strength that built his empire eventually pushed him into conflicts that weakened it. His desire for greater control created new challenges. Eventually, the European powers united against him, and Napoleon lost the empire he had built. The lesson is not simply that ambition is wrong. Ambition has created some of history's greatest achievements. The deeper lesson is that ambition without limits can create problems that even great leaders cannot overcome. This brings us to one of the central ideas of this documentary. Power is not only about reaching the top. The greatest challenge is what happens after reaching the top. Because once someone gains power, they must manage the expectations of everyone around them. Supporters want rewards, allies want influence, institutions want stability, the public wants results. Future leaders begin watching for opportunities. Every decision creates consequences, and slowly, power becomes more complicated. This is why the study of power is ultimately the study of human relationships. A leader does not operate in isolation. They operate inside a web of competing interests. The longer they remain at the center, the more complicated that web becomes. The person who once controlled the system may eventually discover that they must spend all their energy maintaining the system. And this is where our journey begins. Because the question we must ask is not only, how do people gain power? The deeper question is, how does power transform the people who possess it? And even more importantly, when a person spends years building a powerful system around themselves, can they still control the forces they have created? To understand that, we must move from the individual leader to the machine behind the leader, because power is never carried by one person alone. It is carried by networks. It is carried by institutions. It is carried by people whose interests become tied to its survival. And once those networks become powerful enough, they begin shaping the future of the leader who created them. That is where the next chapter begins. The creation of the power machine. Chapter 2, Building the Power Machine. The networks behind every powerful leader. Power is rarely held by one person alone. From the outside, political power often appears simple. People see one leader, one face, one voice, one person making decisions. But behind every powerful individual exists something much larger. A network, a system. A machine built from relationships, institutions, loyalty, resources, and shared interests. The leader may stand at the center, but the power surrounding them is created by many different groups. There are political supporters who provide legitimacy. There are security forces that protect stability. There are advisors who shape decisions. There are business networks that provide resources. There are loyal individuals who depend on the continuation of the system. And there are institutions that become connected to the leader's authority. The longer a person remains in power, the more complex this machine becomes. The leader is no longer simply leading a country or an organization. They are managing a network of people whose futures are connected to the survival of that system. This is one of the most important ideas explored by political scientists Bueno de Mesquita and Alastair Smith in their book, The Dictator's Handbook. Their argument challenges the common belief that leaders stay in power simply because they are popular or because they control everyone through force. Instead, they explain that leaders survive because they maintain a coalition of essential supporters. Every leader, regardless of the political system, depends on certain groups. These groups may be large or small, but they are the people whose support allows the leader to remain powerful. A leader does not need everyone to support them. They need the right people. They need the people who control the important resources, the people who influence institutions, the people who can protect or threaten the system. This creates a political reality. A leader is always making calculations. Who must be rewarded? Who must be trusted? Who must be watched? Who is becoming too powerful? Who is becoming too independent? The challenge is that these relationships are never permanent. Support is often connected to interests. A person may appear loyal because the system benefits them, but if their interests change, their loyalty may also change. History has shown this repeatedly. Many powerful leaders were not removed by ordinary opponents. They were weakened by people who were once part of their own inner circle. The same networks that helped them rise eventually became places where competition and ambition developed. This idea connects strongly with the work of sociologist Robert Michels. In his famous book Political Parties, published in 1911, Michels developed what he called the iron law of oligarchy. His argument was simple but powerful. Any large organization, regardless of its original purpose, eventually develops a small group of people who control decision-making. Michels studied political parties and social movements. He observed that organizations often begin with a message of equality and participation. They promise that ordinary people will have a voice, but as organizations grow, they require structure. They require leaders. They require specialists who understand the system. Slowly, power becomes concentrated among a smaller group. The organization that began as a movement of many people can eventually become controlled by a few individuals. This idea helps us understand one of the great contradictions of political power. Many leaders rise by promising to change a system. But once they become responsible for managing that system, they often create their own structures of control. The movement becomes an institution. The institution develops leaders, the leaders develop interests, and those interests begin influencing decisions. This pattern can be seen throughout history. Revolutionary movements often begin with a vision of transforming society. They attract people who believe in change. But after gaining power, they face a new challenge. How do they govern? How do they maintain unity? How do they manage disagreements among those who fought together? The struggle changes. The enemy is no longer only outside the movement. The challenge becomes managing the competing ambitions inside it. This is why long-term political systems often develop layers of loyalty. There are the original supporters who remember the struggle that created the movement. There are newer supporters who join because of opportunity. There are officials who rise through the system. There are younger generations who want their own chance to influence a future. Each group has a different relationship with power, and each group has different expectations. This creates what we can call the pressure of accumulated power. At the beginning, a leader may only need to convince people of a vision. Later, the leader must manage a complicated collection of interests. The question changes from, how do we create change, to, how do we keep everyone satisfied enough to prevent the system from breaking apart? This is where power becomes extremely difficult, because different groups often want different things. A military group may want security and influence. Business groups may want economic opportunities. Political supporters may want positions and recognition. The public may want better services and improved living conditions. Younger generations may want new leadership and new ideas. A leader sitting at the center must balance all of these competing demands. And the longer the leader remains there, the more difficult the balancing act becomes. The political machine grows larger. The number of relationships increases. The number of expectations increases. The number of people who have something to gain or lose increases. Eventually, the leader faces a hidden problem. The system created to protect power also creates new sources of pressure. The leader becomes dependent on the very networks they created. This is one of the great ironies of power. A leader may believe, I control the system, but over time the reality may become, the system controls my choices. The leader cannot easily remove powerful allies because they may destabilize the system. They cannot easily introduce major reforms because some groups may lose their advantages. They cannot easily leave because many people depend on their continued presence. Power creates connections, but those connections can become chains. History provides many examples of leaders who built powerful systems around themselves, only to discover that managing those systems became their greatest challenge. The question is not only, can you build a machine of power? The deeper question is, can you control the machine after it has grown beyond you? Because every powerful system eventually creates people with their own ambitions. Every alliance creates expectations, every position creates competition, and every network of loyalty contains individuals who are thinking about the future. The next stage of our journey takes us deeper into the hidden world of power, because once a leader has built the machine, another challenge begins. How do they control the people inside it? How do they prevent allies from becoming rivals? And what happens when the person at the top begins losing access to the truth? This is the hidden prison of power. Chapter 3, the hidden prison of power. When the leader loses touch with reality, power creates a strange contradiction. The more powerful a person becomes, the more people surround them. They have advisors, they have assistants, they have security, They have supporters everywhere. From the outside, it appears that such a person has access to more information than anyone else. But history reveals a surprising truth. Sometimes, the most powerful people in society are also among the most isolated. Because having many people around you does not always mean that people are willing to tell you the truth. And this creates one of the greatest dangers of long-term power. The leader begins to live inside a world carefully designed around them. A world where bad news is softened. A world where failures are explained away. A world where criticism becomes a sign of disloyalty. A world where the leader slowly loses contact with the reality experienced by ordinary people. This is one of the deepest problems explored by political thinker Hannah Arendt in her study of totalitarian systems. In her influential work, The Origins of Totalitarianism, Arendt examined how certain political systems maintain control not only through institutions and force, but through the control of information, ideas, and public perception. Her work helps us understand an important principle. Power does not only control people through commands, power also controls people through stories. The person who controls the information environment controls what people believe is happening. But there is a danger. The same system that controls information from the public can eventually begin controlling information received by the leader. When everyone becomes afraid to deliver bad news, the leader becomes trapped inside an artificial reality. The leader may believe they are seeing the whole picture, but they may only be seeing the version of reality that others are willing to present. This problem is not unique to governments. It appears anywhere human beings compete for power. In families, in businesses, in organizations, in political movements. Whenever one person gains too much authority, people around them often begin adjusting their behavior. Some become careful with their words. Some hide disagreements. Some agree publicly while disagreeing privately. Over time, the leader receives less truth and more approval. This creates what we can call the danger of the power bubble. A power bubble is an environment where a person's position protects them from hearing uncomfortable realities. At first, the bubble may feel like loyalty. The leader thinks, my people support me. But gradually support can become silence, respect can become fear, loyalty can become obedience, and obedience can prevent honest communication. Robert Greene explores similar ideas in his study of power and human behavior in The 48 Laws of Power. One of the themes throughout Greene's work is that powerful people must understand the hidden motivations of those around them. Not everyone who appears loyal is loyal for the same reason. Some people support a leader because they believe in the mission. Others support because they benefit from the relationship. Some support because they fear the consequences of opposition. And some support because they are waiting for the right moment to advance their own ambitions. This creates a dangerous situation for leaders. They must constantly separate genuine loyalty from strategic obedience. But the higher a person rises, the harder this becomes. A normal person can ask, what do people really think about me? A powerful person may not receive honest answers. People may tell them what they believe the leader wants to hear. This is why history contains many examples of powerful individuals making decisions based on incomplete or distorted information. They were not necessarily surrounded by fewer people. They were surrounded by people who were afraid to speak freely. One of the most famous examples is Joseph Stalin and the Soviet Union. Stalin built one of the most powerful political systems of the 20th century. His authority was enormous. The Communist Party, the security services, and government institutions were organized around maintaining his control. But the same environment that protected Stalin also limited the information reaching him. Officials learned that delivering unpleasant news could be dangerous. As a result, many people adapted by telling leaders what was expected rather than what was true. This illustrates a painful lesson of power. A leader can create a system strong enough to protect themselves, but that same system can prevent them from seeing reality clearly. Another example can be found in the later years of many long-serving leaders throughout history. At the beginning of their leadership, they may have had close connections with ordinary citizens. They may have understood public frustrations. They may have listened to criticism. But after many years in power, distance grows. The leader's daily experience becomes completely different from that of ordinary people. They live with different security. They receive different information. They interact with different people. Slowly, the world they experience is no longer the same world experienced by the people they govern. This is not only a political problem, it is a human problem. Success changes relationships. Authority changes communication. Power changes the way people interact with you. The more important a person becomes, the more difficult it can be to find someone willing to challenge them honestly. And this creates another danger: fear. A leader who becomes afraid of losing power may begin seeing threats everywhere. A former ally may become a possible rival. A criticism may appear to be an attack. A disagreement may appear to be betrayal. When fear enters the mind of a powerful person, decision-making can change. The leader stops asking, "What is the best decision?" and starts asking, "Who is threatening my position?" This is where power begins changing from a tool into a prison. The person who once sought power to achieve a goal may eventually spend all their energy protecting the position itself. The original mission becomes secondary. Survival becomes the priority. This pattern appears throughout history. Many leaders begin with a purpose larger than themselves. But over time, maintaining power becomes the main objective. The system becomes focused not on the future of the country or organization, but on preserving the position of the person at the center. And this creates a dangerous cycle. The more a leader fears losing power, the more they depend on the system around them. The more they depend on the system, the more isolated they become. The more isolated they become, the harder it becomes to understand reality. And the harder it becomes to understand reality, the greater the chance of making decisions that weaken the very system they are trying to protect. This is the hidden prison of power. It is not a prison made of walls. It is a prison made of loyalty, fear, information control, and human psychology. The leader may appear free because they control everything around them, but they may become trapped by the very forces they created. And this leads us to the next question. If power creates networks, and networks create competing interests, what happens when those interests begin fighting for influence? Because inside every powerful system, there is another battle taking place. The battle between allies, the battle between factions, the battle of people who helped create the system and now want a greater share of its future. That is where we go next. The invisible war inside the machine of power. Chapter 4, the enviable war inside power. Factions, interest, and the battle for influence. Every powerful system contains a hidden struggle. From the outside, a government, organization, or movement may appear united. There is one leader, one message, one direction. But beneath the surface, different groups are constantly competing for influence. They compete for recognition. They compete for resources. They compete for positions. They compete for the ability to shape the future. This is one of the great realities of power. Unity on the outside does not always mean agreement on the inside. A powerful leader may appear to control the entire system, but inside that system are individuals and groups with their own ambitions. They may support the leader today, but they are also thinking about tomorrow. They are asking, who will have influence in the future? Who will control important decisions? Who will benefit when circumstances change? This is the invisible war inside every powerful structure. To understand this struggle, we must first understand a simple truth about human behavior. People organize around interests. They protect what benefits them. They defend the positions they have gained. And when those interests become connected to power, they become powerful forces themselves. Political economist Mancur Olson explored this idea in his influential book, The Logic of Collective Action. Olson studied how groups organize and why some groups become more influential than others. His argument was that small, organized groups often have enormous influence because their members have strong reasons to protect their interests. A small group that benefits greatly from a decision may work very hard to influence that decision. Meanwhile, a much larger group that is affected only slightly may not organize with the same energy. This creates an important lesson. Influence is not always determined by numbers. Sometimes it is determined by organization and motivation. In politics, this means that different groups inside a system can become powerful because they are organized around specific interests. A military group may care about security and authority. Business groups may care about economic policies. Political elites may care about positions and access. Regional groups may care about representation and resources. Each group has its own priorities. Each group has its own expectations. And the leader at the center must constantly balance these competing demands. This brings us back to the ideas of Bueno de Mesquita and Alastair Smith in The Dictator's Handbook. They argue that leaders survive by maintaining a coalition of supporters. But maintaining a coalition is not simple. Every supporter has expectations. Every ally wants something in return. Every powerful person inside the system wants to protect their influence. The leader becomes a manager of competing interests. At first, this may appear to strengthen the leader. A large network of supporters creates stability, but over time, it creates a new challenge. The leader becomes dependent on the people around them. The more powerful the supporters become, the more difficult they are to control. This creates a paradox. The leader builds a system to protect power, but the system creates people who also possess power, and those people may eventually have their own ambitions. History provides many examples of this pattern. The Roman Empire experienced this repeatedly. Emperors depended heavily on military commanders. The army could protect the emperor, but the army could also decide who became emperor. The same institution that defended political authority could also challenge it. This shows a fundamental principle. A source of protection can also become a source of threat. A similar pattern appeared in many revolutionary movements throughout history. Movements often begin with unity because they have a common enemy. People are united by a shared goal. But after victory, the situation changes. The question is no longer, how do we defeat the enemy? The question becomes, who decides what happens next? Different visions emerge. Different leaders gain influence. Different groups believe they deserve recognition. The struggle that was once against an outside force becomes an internal struggle for control. This is why the period after gaining power is often more difficult than the struggle to gain power itself. Before victory, people can unite around a dream. After victory, they must divide resources, responsibilities, and authority. And division creates competition. One of the greatest mistakes leaders make is assuming that everyone who helped them rise will always remain united around the same goal. But people change. Circumstances change. Interests change. A person who was a loyal supporter during one period may become a competitor during another. The reason is simple. People do not only fight for ideas, they also fight for position. They fight for security. They fight for influence. They fight to ensure that they are not forgotten when power is redistributed. This is where succession becomes one of the most dangerous moments for any long-lasting system. As long as one powerful figure remains at the center, competing groups may remain controlled. But when the question of the future appears, hidden rivalries often become visible. People who remained quiet begin making moves. People who followed begin positioning themselves. People who waited begin searching for opportunities. The future becomes a competition, and the leader faces one of the hardest challenges. How do you prepare for change without creating fear among those who benefit from the current system? This is why many powerful systems struggle with succession. The problem is not only finding a replacement. The problem is managing all the people who believe they deserve influence after the transition. A leader may have spent decades controlling rival groups, but once the question of succession emerges, those groups may begin competing openly. The balance that held the system together begins to weaken. This is the hidden danger of concentrated power. The more power is centered around one person, the more uncertain the future becomes when that person is no longer able to control the balance. The system becomes dependent on the person who created it, and that creates a final question. What happens when the leader who held everything together is gone? Can institutions survive without the individual? Can the system continue without the person at the center? Or does the entire structure begin to collapse? History shows us that this is where many powerful systems face their greatest test, because the true measure of power is not only how long someone can remain in control. The true measure of power is whether the system they created can survive beyond them. And this brings us to the final stage of our journey, the struggle of succession, the moment when every powerful leader must face the question they spent years avoiding: what happens after me? Chapter 5: The Succession Crisis. What happens when the leader is no longer there? Every powerful leader eventually faces the same question. A question that cannot be avoided. A question that time itself forces every person in power to answer. What happens after me? For some leaders, this question is uncomfortable. For others, it is frightening. Because building power and transferring power are two completely different challenges. A person may spend decades creating a system. They may build alliances. They may create institutions. They may develop a loyal network. They may become the symbol of stability. But eventually, every political system must face a moment when the individual at the center is no longer able to control events. The question is not whether change will come. Change always comes. The question is whether the system is prepared for it. This is where the difference between strong leadership and strong institutions becomes clear. A strong leader can solve problems through personal influence. A strong institution can solve problems even when the leader is gone. Political scientist Samuel Huntington explored this idea in his influential book, Political Order in Changing Societies. Huntington argued that stable societies are not created simply by having powerful leaders. They are created by developing institutions that are strong enough to manage change. Institutions provide continuity. They create rules. They establish predictable processes. They allow societies to continue functioning even when individuals change. Without strong institutions, political systems often become dependent on personalities. And when politics becomes dependent on one person, succession becomes dangerous. Because the departure of the leader does not only create a vacancy, it creates uncertainty. Different groups begin asking, who will protect our interests? Who will control important decisions? Who will have influence in the new system? Who will lose power? These questions can transform a peaceful transition into a struggle for survival. Francis Fukuyama explored similar ideas in his study of political development. In The Origins of Political Order, Fukuyama examined how societies develop stable political systems. One of his important arguments is that successful societies require a balance between strong government, accountability, and institutions that operate beyond individual personalities. When institutions are weak, power becomes personal. When power becomes personal, the future becomes uncertain. The system depends on the person, and when the person leaves, the system enters a dangerous period. History provides many examples of this challenge. The Roman Empire is one of the clearest. The empire was enormous. Its military was powerful. Its administration stretched across continents. Yet the question of succession repeatedly created instability. A strong emperor could maintain order. But when an emperor died or was removed, competing groups often fought for control. The empire's problem was not always a lack of strength. The problem was that too much depended on who occupied the position at the top. A similar pattern appeared in many modern states. In some cases, leaders who ruled for decades became symbols of the entire political system. Their image became connected with national identity. Their supporters believed that their continued leadership represented stability. But this created a difficult situation. When the leader eventually left, the country had to answer a difficult question. Was the system strong because of its institutions, or was it strong because of one person? This distinction is critical. A country can appear stable for many years because one individual successfully manages conflicts between competing groups, but that stability may hide deeper weaknesses. The leader may personally resolve disagreements. The leader may personally control rival factions. The leader may personally maintain relationships with powerful groups. But institutions do not automatically become stronger simply because one person is strong. Sometimes the opposite happens. The stronger the individual becomes, the weaker institutions may become. Because decisions increasingly depend on personal relationships rather than established rules. This creates what we can call the succession trap. The leader becomes so central that replacing them becomes almost impossible. Everyone knows the leader. Everyone understands the leader's authority. Everyone knows the leader's methods, but fewer people understand the system beyond the leader. The result is uncertainty. A successor may inherit the position, but they do not automatically inherit the same authority. They do not automatically inherit the same respect. They do not automatically inherit the same relationships. Power is not only a title, Power is built through years of trust, fear, reputation, and personal connections. This is why children or chosen successors of powerful leaders often face a difficult reality. They may inherit a position, but they must still prove their own legitimacy. They may inherit a system, but they must still manage the people inside that system. They may inherit influence, but they cannot automatically inherit the exact power of the person before them. History has shown that some political families successfully maintain influence across generations. Others collapse quickly after the original leader disappears. The difference often comes down to one question: were strong institutions created, or was everything built around one individual? This is the final lesson about long-term power. The greatest achievement of a leader is not simply remaining powerful. Anyone can attempt to hold power. The greater achievement is creating a system that does not depend on one person, because eventually, every leader faces the same reality. No person can remain forever. No position lasts forever. No individual can control history indefinitely. The true legacy of power is not measured only by how long someone stays at the top. It is measured by what remains after they leave. Do institutions survive? Does society remain stable? Can the next generation participate peacefully? Can the country continue moving forward? These questions reveal the difference between personal power and lasting leadership. Personal power depends on the individual. Lasting leadership creates something greater than the individual. And this brings us to the conclusion of our journey. Because after studying the rise of power, the creation of power networks, the psychological dangers of power, the internal battles within power systems, and the challenge of succession, one final question remains. What is the ultimate lesson history teaches us about power? The answer may be uncomfortable. Power can build, power can protect, power can transform societies. But power without limits can eventually become the force that destroys the very system it was created to control. The final chapter is about that lesson: the rise, the fall, and the eternal cycle of power. Chapter 6, the final lesson of history. The rise, fall, and eternal cycle of power. Throughout history, civilizations have risen and fallen. Kings have built empires. Revolutionaries have transformed nations. Generals have conquered territories. Presidents have shaped the destiny of countries. But behind every story of power, there is a pattern that repeats itself again and again. A person rises, a vision is created, support is gathered, a system is built, power grows, and eventually the same forces that created that power begin to challenge it. This is the great cycle of power: the rise, the consolidation, the struggle to maintain control, and finally the challenge of transition. The study of power is not only the study of leaders, it is the study of human nature, it is the study of ambition, it is the study of loyalty, it is the study of fear. And it is the study of how human beings behave when they gain the ability to influence the lives of others. More than 5 centuries ago, Niccolò Machiavelli examined this reality in The Prince. His work continues to influence political thought because he understood something fundamental. Power exists in the real world, not in an ideal world. Leaders must deal with human emotions. They must deal with ambition. They must deal with competition. They must understand that maintaining power requires more than simply gaining it. But history has also shown us that the struggle to maintain power can become the very thing that weakens those who possess it. Robert Greene, in The 48 Laws of Power, explored the psychological side of influence. His work shows us that power is not only about institutions and positions, it is also about relationships. It is about perception. It is about understanding the motivations of people around you. A powerful person must always ask, who truly supports me? Who benefits from my success? Who is waiting for an opportunity? Because every relationship around power contains a mixture of loyalty and interest. This is why power is never as simple as it appears. Behind every powerful leader is a complicated network of people. Bueno de Mesquita and Alastair Smith demonstrated this in The Dictator's Handbook. Their research explains that leaders survive because they maintain essential supporters. They depend on coalitions. They depend on networks. They depend on people whose interests are connected to the continuation of the system. But this creates a dangerous contradiction. The same people who help maintain power can eventually become people who compete for power. Supporters become stakeholders. Stakeholders become power centers. Power centers create competition, and competition creates uncertainty. Robert Michels identified this pattern more than a century ago in Political Parties through his idea of the iron law of oligarchy. Organizations may begin with the promise of representing everyone, but as they grow, leadership becomes concentrated. A small group begins making important decisions. The structure created to organize people eventually creates its own hierarchy. This is not only a political phenomenon, it is a human phenomenon. Wherever people organize, influence develops. Wherever influence develops, competition follows. And wherever competition exists, power struggles emerge. Hannah Arendt showed us another important dimension of power. Power can change the relationship between leaders and reality. When leaders become surrounded by systems designed to protect them, they may gradually lose access to honest information. They may hear praise more often than criticism. They may see loyalty where there is only fear. They may mistake silence for agreement. And this creates one of the greatest dangers of power, the inability to see the world clearly. A leader who cannot receive the truth cannot make decisions based on reality. And a system that cannot correct itself eventually becomes vulnerable. Samuel Huntington and Francis Fukuyama remind us of the final lesson. Strong societies are not built around individuals. They are built around institutions. A leader may be intelligent, a leader may be courageous, a leader may be successful, but no individual can replace a functioning system. Because every person is temporary, every generation eventually changes, every society must prepare for the future. The ultimate test of leadership is not only how someone gains power, it is what happens when they are no longer there. Can the institutions continue? Can the country remain stable? Can new generations participate? Can the system adapt? These are the questions that reveal whether power was truly used to build something lasting. History teaches us that many leaders begin with a mission. They want to solve problems. They want to create change. They want to protect their people. But over time, the struggle to maintain power can become stronger than the original purpose. The mission becomes secondary. The system becomes focused on survival. The leader begins protecting the position instead of protecting the vision that created the position. And this is where power becomes dangerous. Because power has a natural tendency to protect itself. It creates people who depend on it. It creates institutions shaped around it. It creates relationships that fear change. Eventually, leaving becomes harder than staying. And staying becomes more important than the original reason for being there. This is why history repeatedly asks the same question. Is power a tool for serving a purpose? Or does power eventually become the purpose itself? The answer depends on whether those who hold power understand one important truth. Power is temporary. Titles are temporary. Positions are temporary. Influence is temporary. But the systems created, the institutions strengthened, and the opportunities given to future generations can last far beyond one individual. The greatest leaders in history were not simply those who controlled others. They were those who understood the responsibility that came with influence. They understood that power is not only about control, it is about stewardship. It is about creating something that survives beyond the person who built it. Because in the end, every powerful person faces the same reality. Time does not negotiate. History does not stop. And eventually, every leader must answer the same question. When my time ends, what remains in? Will there be a stronger institution? A stronger society? A stronger generation? Or will everything disappear because it depended on me alone? This is the final lesson of power. The greatest achievement is not holding power forever. The greatest achievement is using power wisely enough that the world can continue without you. Because true greatness is not measured by how long someone sits at the top. It is measured by what they leave behind when they are gone.